Dr. Pauline Chen tells us, there used to be just two surefire ways to get a medical student's attention: offer free food or give the answer to a question on an upcoming exam. Now, apparently, there is a third: sponsor a poetry contest. In 2011, as part of a larger collaboration, Yale University School of Music and University College London Medical School sponsored a poetry contest for their students. The judges expected no more than a handful of entries. They ended up with more than 160. We had underestimated the interest of medical students in poetry, their motivation to write a poem, and the quality of their work, said Dr. John Martin, organizer of the competition and professor of cardiovascular medicine at University College London. While some have posited that the inspirational muse for students who entered the competition was the first-place prize of $1,500, donated anonymously by a patient interested in literature, Dr. Martin believes the enthusiastic response, in fact, reflects a resurrection of interest in poetry among doctors. It was rare in my generation for doctors to write poems, but I think there's a new interest in poetry and how it can arise from what we do, he said. Poetry has long been linked to medicine. In mythology, the Greek god Apollo was responsible for, among other things, both healing and poetry. And poets like John Keats, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., and William Carlos Williams were all trained as doctors. For them and other physicians of their time, reading or writing poetry required skills not that dissimilar from those employed in daily clinical work, an ability to connect emotionally with the subject, as well as careful attention to rhythm, whether it was in the form of verse or heartbeats and breathing. Interest in poetry waned over the last few generations as physicians became more preoccupied with high-tech biomedical research than with iambic pentameter. Now, however, as the medical profession places more and more weight on approaches that emphasize the patient's wellness, doctors are once again turning to poetry for inspiration. And for education, poetry opens our minds to asking patients the right questions while helping us address the emotional demands of doctoring, especially in the formative years, said Dr. Thomas Duffy, a professor of medicine at Yale Medical School. Dr. Pauline Chen, writing in The Well for the New York Times in 2011. As she noted, there have been many writer-doctors in earlier times, including John Keats and William Carlos Williams. Dr. Richard Carter, writing in the Annals of Thoracic Surgery, suggests that poet William Carlos Williams was an indefatigable professional. He exemplified the empathetic physician, treating his patients as individuals with honesty, affection, and respect. He believed, as did his literary god John Keats, that the poet is a humanist, physician to all people. To Williams, allegiance to humanism was important as excellence in medical science. Because of a deep sense of humanity, pervasive in both his medical work and his writing, Williams often is recommended for study in medical ethics curricula. Some might even take it farther than humanism. Dr. John Diamond contends that doctors who write shouldn't see their writing as a hobby or only as a means to help themselves, but as a way by which they can help their patients. And that's by bringing a poetic state of mind, a poetic state of heart to every patient. Because for Dr. Diamond, the healing goes beyond the prescriptions and procedures, but somehow through their selves, their deepest selves, as intimated in the poetry they write. So when we meet Peter Kaminsky and journey with him in his challenging struggles to become a doctor, we recognize that the poetry he writes is essential, not simply as a way of coping with the losses and hurdles he experiences, but it's to help him tap into deeper places in his life, to get a full experience of the human condition, so ultimately he can be a better doctor and a better, more compassionate human being. a healer in the true sense of the word. And we'll learn about a key moment in the life of the author who created the character, Peter Kaminsky, in his novel titled Keystone. It's a time in the author's life when he was gripped so deeply by a haunting tune that it stayed with him and helped shape in a certain way the character Peter Kaminsky. In fact, Dr. Remakus uses as the epigraph for the first chapter of Keystone a quote, "He sets out on his endless search, uncertain what he's searching for." And we might get a hunch that the song in the life of Bernard Leo Remakus is more than a lovely melody he wanted to hear again, but in some way is a song that captured in that way the endless search and longing in our heart of hearts as humans. Bernard Leo Remakus is a native of Wilkes-Barre. He received his B.S. degree from King's College, a master's in education from East Stroudsburg, and his M.D. degree from the Temple University School of Medicine. He completed a 3-year residency in internal medicine at Abington Memorial Hospital, which led to his certification as a diplomat of the American Board of Internal Medicine. Dr. Remakus has practiced internal medicine in a rural area with a physician shortage in this area for over 4 decades. During that time, he has published 4 novels, Keystone, Cassidy's Solution, Mia, and the Lame Duck, 3 works of nonfiction, The Malpractice Epidemic, A Layman's Guide to Medical Malpractice, Medicine from the Heart, and Medicine Between the Lines, 1 screenplay. And The Lame Duck won the 2019 Reader's Favorite Bronze Medal in the fiction thrillers medical genre. Dr. Remakus has also authored more than 200 scientific articles that have been published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of the American Medical Association, Newsweek, and many others. From 1991 to 2002, he was the featured columnist and a member of the editorial advisory board of Internal Medicine World Report. His column in that publication had the distinction of being one of the most widely read and longest-running physician-written columns in America. We had a chance to speak by phone with Dr. Remakus during these fraught times about his writing and his life in medicine that he has been centered in Susquehanna County.
To be very honest with you, I think that I was born a doctor. People talk about having vocations to the priesthood, that they were meant to be a priest. I believe I was meant to be a doctor because even growing up, when we'd be playing Little League and another kid would get hit and it'd start to bleed, or somebody would get sick in school and everybody in the class would back up and try to get away from it, I was the one that usually went to the person's side and my friend's side and tried to help them. It was just an instinct that I had, and as I grew up, the instinct grew. I actually went to a wedding one time at a wedding hall by the General Hospital, and as I was walking by the hospital with my father, he said, "Always say a prayer every time you pass the hospital. Always say a prayer for sick people." And that just put an idea in my head that sick people really needed help and that this is what I wanted to do with my life. So it actually started in my childhood.
And you mentioned General Hospital, and that's General Hospital in Wilkes-Barre, right?
Absolutely.
So you're a Wilkes-Barre native.
Yeah, I spent the first quarter century of my life in Wilkes-Barre.
And was there something about the town and its work ethic and the values in the valley that contributed to shaping who you are as a doctor and as a person?
Absolutely. In fact, I listen to your show all the time, and I know recently, over the last couple of months, you've had people on that have, in their books, referenced Wilkes-Barre. Well, Keystone doesn't reference Wilkes-Barre. Keystone is about Wilkes-Barre because half of the book takes place in Wilkes-Barre because I think Wilkes-Barre is one of the unique places on this planet where the people have always been caring, they've been resilient, they've been proud, they've been honest, they've been hardworking, and they've never taken no for an answer. And it was growing up in this type of atmosphere around other people where they just wouldn't accept mediocrity if you were going to go ahead and move to the head of the class that gave me the type of values that I still have today.
Were there doctors in the area? Were you aware of any doctors you looked up to before you went off to school?
We had a family doctor, Dr. Boban, who was actually quite a famous doctor. He had been an Army doctor in the war, and he had a very large practice in Wilkes-Barre. In fact, all the people that were celebrities, that were congressmen, that were actors, that were well-known businessmen, they were all his patients. And the man had a whole fleet of expensive cars, and he would actually go to the poor people and actually make house calls. He would drive his pink Cadillac convertible up into the heights of Wilkes-Barre to go ahead and see a sick kid that had a strep throat. So I looked up to him because he was a person who had accomplished what he set out to accomplish, and he had a wide range of people that he was willing to make himself available to, and it was a role model that to this day I still think about some of the things that he did.
So you had this love and this inclination. Where did it take you from Wilkes-Barre?
Well, I didn't have an easy path to medical school. I was applying to medical school at a time when 6,000 people were applying for every 200 seats, and it was very difficult to get in. So going to a small college like King's, considering the number of people that you had in your class, a place like King's would maybe put 2 students in the medical school. Because back then, back in the 60s, back in the Vietnam era, there were great regulations on the medical schools on how they could accept and who they could accept, and most of them were state-based. So, for example, for a medical school in Pennsylvania to get the kind of government funding, both statewide and federal, that it required, it had to select from a diversity of students. So they basically went ahead and divided all the different counties in the state, and beyond that, they had quotas racially, which they had to accept a certain percentage of their class as either black or Hispanic students, and which, by the way, was one of the smartest things that medicine could have ever done. So I actually, on the first round of trying to get into medical school, I didn't get in. And I was drafted into the Army. I spent a very brief time with that. And then I wound up teaching high school and reapplying to medical school. And I had my first interview on my second application, and I was told at Temple University that they were really impressed with everything I had going, and there would be a seat for me, but they couldn't guarantee when because of this protocol that they had where they had to pigeonhole every student, and they had to accept every different pigeonhole. They based it on race, they based it on sex, they based it on the county that you lived in, they based it on if you were married or not, they based it on if you had an advanced degree or just a bachelor's degree, they based it on if your parents or your brothers or sisters were doctors or alumni of their particular school. So you had a very small pigeonhole from which to be selected. And things happened. My next application went out and got lost in the Agnes flood. And it finally went down that I was on to my 4th year applying, but I had met with this doctor, and I learned how the acceptance process came down. And the one remark that he made to me was, it's a shame that you're applying from Luzerne County, Wilkes-Barre. We have such a large number of students applying from that area, and many of them, their mothers and fathers are doctors, and you know you're sort of getting pushed to the back of the class because of a lot of things that are happening there. He said it's a shame that you weren't a resident of one of these small counties that don't have many people applying to medical school. So I looked into it, and I found a small county, and I found that they were in need of a lab director for their hospital, and I contacted them, and I got the job as the lab director. And while I was the lab director, I applied with a new address from this small town in this small county, a county which had only ever had something like 2 students apply to medical school. And that was the trick. A couple months later, I was accepted to medical school.
Wow, it's exhausting to hear it, though.
Yeah, but in the book, Peter Kaminsky in the book, Keystone, I am not him. Because if I had to write about that, I'd still be writing the book. If I had to write about my own life. But Peter Kaminsky, he gives it 3 years until he finally gets in. But he shows the struggle that many people have. And this is one of the real short-sighted things of our country. There are so many extraordinarily talented, intelligent people that could be serving as doctors, but we've limited the number of people who could become doctors. And now, during this epidemic, we're seeing what that limitation has caused.
Doctor, aren't they calling out retired physicians and retired nurses?
They're calling everybody out. In fact, they're just talking right now about allowing a doctor with a license in any state to practice medicine in any state where he's needed during this crisis, which is a very smart thing to be doing.
You experienced these hurdles, and you had the strength of character to keep going at this application process. But what was it that led you to tell this in novel form?
Well, it was a story. I felt that, and once again, it's not an autobiography because things happen in this book that never happened to me, but it more was like a 360-degree mirror that showed everything around me while I went through this whole process of fighting my way into medical school. And when I finally got to medical school, doing extremely well in medical school, having my choice of any residency I wanted at the end of medical school. So I was very successful in medical school, and I think that all the things that I did, teaching high school and coaching high school athletics, teaching college for a while, being a hospital lab director, and seeing how other personnel were treated by doctors, all of these kind of things gave me a level of maturity that no kid out of college could have possibly ever had. And, as far as having the fortitude to continue after I received a number of rejection letters, and again, the rejections weren't based on my academic record in college. I had a very fine academic record in college, and every time that you applied, the rejection letter always stated, despite the fact that you were an eminently qualified student. And then they went on to tell you about the numbers and, how you just didn't fit into where you had to fit to get into that particular school. But the fortitude came a lot from a lot of support from my family. I had a mother and father and two sisters who never stopped believing in me and never stopped believing in my dream and that the dream would come true, and allowed me the space to continue it rather than trying to say, you already have a good job as a lab director. Why don't you just leave it at that? Why do you want to go back to school and go another 4 years of medical school and then do another 3 years residency and all these kind of things? You've got a good-paying job. You're in science. You're using your science training. Why don't you just leave it there? Or why don't you, go back to teaching college or something like that? I didn't have anybody putting those kind of ideas in my mind. I had a mother and father and two sisters who, when they saw the look on my face when I got a letter of rejection, they went by and sort of smiled, and you can read it in their eyes that, you hang in there, it's going to happen. So that was where the fortitude came from.
Let me just ask you this, Doctor, then. There's something beyond the practice of medicine as a profession and a job and the art of healing. Is that what drives you?
Absolutely. It's a calling, and this is going to sound perhaps a little bit egocentric, but doctors are healers. Doctors aren't just people that put in the requisite time and go ahead and give back to patients what they read in books. They're healers. They were put on this earth to heal people, to engage in the most extraordinary process in mankind. Healing comes from God, and I am not trying to get overly religious, but I believe in God, and I got to tell you, this is no lie. In my medical practice in 45 years, I've seen miracles. I've seen things that have happened that should have never happened. And I certainly, although I was there to watch them, it wasn't anything that I did that caused them. So there's something above and beyond, and a physician who remains true to the Hippocratic Oath and who devotes his life to the care of people and who doesn't try to profit from it exorbitantly, I believe these people are blessed and they're given the capacity to heal.
Do you work with some of those notions, that feeling? Is that at the core of your novel, Keystone?
Keystone is more matter of fact. Keystone isn't by any means a religious book. There are elements in there where, Peter goes ahead and he discusses God and his faith and everything like that. But this is more about the matter of fact creation of a doctor from a person who thinks that he wants to go ahead and learn how to help people. So the book is not an overly spiritual book. It's not really spiritual at all, except in the capacity to perhaps inspire people that there are things above and beyond that you realize. And the emotions that I tried to evoke in Keystone that I felt were very necessary were the extraordinarily poorly understood love between a man and his father, or a father and his son, about this extraordinary bond. We talk about how we're all close to our mothers and how a daughter and a mother have these special things. And we generally don't talk that much about this extraordinary bond between a father and a son. And throughout the book, Peter's father, who was a shoemaker in Wilkes-Barre, Peter's father is in the hospital a lot because before the war he had been a miner and he developed emphysema. He developed black lung disease. And a lot of Peter's own attention on his schoolwork is distracted by the fact that he has to keep tabs on how his father is, because his father is sick frequently and in and out of the hospital in Wilkes-Barre. So this whole love between a father and a son, that's one of the emotions I tried to show. And I also tried to show the complexity of life in medicine. Medicine is not an institution unto itself. It's an institution like any other. There's prejudice within medical school between different people. There are marriages that dissolve. There are new loves that are ignited in medical school. It's not a static thing. It's a very dynamic thing, and there are many different human emotions. And I tried to capture as many of these emotions as I could in the book through the many different characters that are in the book.
And you sent me a sample of a song that you talked about being an inspiration.
Yeah, the first writing that I ever did, and I got to tell you, people say, well, when did you start writing? Well, I started writing, I don't know, in grade school, at Marymount Grade School in Wilkes-Barre. I had an extraordinary education. It was one that required you to go ahead and be able to express yourself on paper and be able to express yourself verbally. When asked questions, you were expected to stand up and to be able to express yourself. And that was one of the strengths of it, that even in grade school we were required to write small poems. And I became in love with poetry then, and I really wasn't as fascinated about writing essays, or I wouldn't even think about the possibility of one day writing a novel. But poetry took me through grade school, through high school, even into college. I wrote a lot of poetry. And when I was in my last year of college, I was watching the Johnny Carson show, and he had an act on Hines, Hines, and Dad, the famous dancers Gregory and Maurice Hines and their father. And they sang a song called Early in the Morning, which I heard that song, and it haunted me. To this day, it stayed in my mind. And for years, I tried to find out where I could find a copy of it, and there was nowhere that I could find it. And just a number of months ago, I went on to YouTube, and just for the heck of it, I punched in Early in the Morning, Hines, Hines, and Dad, and sure enough, it came up. And I sat there for hours listening to it over and over again, because the melody of the song, as I said, was so haunting. But the words, it's about a man whose love has just left his life. And early in the morning, she's no longer there. He expects her to be there in the morning, and she's not. And in the book, Peter Kaminsky, the hero of the book, his wife really starts to feel the effects of his not being home because he's spending so much time at the hospital. And she doesn't have the same beliefs that he has. She's from a Jersey Shore point, and she comes from a different type of background. So they love each other, but they're not on the same page with a lot of things. And through the course of the book, things happen, and she winds up leaving him. And when she leaves him, he the next morning, throughout the book, he writes a lot of poetry to try to express the frustration or the joy that he's experiencing. And the next day, he writes a long poem entitled Early in the Morning. Early in the morning, you'll be gone. I know I found a way of learning before the dawn. If a girl dreams of another, or if her love will make her stay. And the whole poem flows like that, and it's all about a man realizing that when he wakes up in the morning, this person that he loves isn't going to be there any longer. And the words are nowhere near the same type of words that were in the song, but I sort of based it in the back of my mind on the melody, and one of these days I'm going to sit down and I'm not going to use the same melody, but I'm going to try to put this thing to a different type of music and actually create a song out of it. But it was inspired by watching the Johnny Carson show and seeing an act that I had never seen before in 1969, and to this day never forgetting that song.
Did you ever think then after that or at the time about the fact that it's dad and sons?
Oh, absolutely. Well, they had great respect for their father, including him in their act, because both of them were very accomplished entertainers on their own. They were a brother act when tap dancing was still a very powerful force in entertainment. And if you listen to this song, the vocals are beautiful, and I mean they're just supported so beautifully by the music.
You were working with words even as a little one in grade school. That's very telling about your sensitivity, and that you know that the arts and music and writing can be that way. So you have a range of books.
Oh, yeah. I've published 6 books right now. I've published Keystone, which is the latest. The book before that, The Lame Duck, actually won an award. It won the bronze medal in the International Book Fair, sponsored by Reader's Favorite. That was quite an honor to win a medal in an international competition that featured people who were submitting books from some of the major publishers in America. And my other novel is Mia, which is a very unique book that centers on not only terrorism and a family's reaction to their hero husband and father being away in the Mideast fighting terrorism, but he's also reported missing in action and about how this destroys their life. And then a character enters their life that basically saves their life in ways that people had never anticipated. And you sort of have to read the book to see how that comes down.
You didn't gravitate to a major city. You chose the rural way of working.
Yeah, I did. And it's an interesting story. When obviously I was out doing things for 5 years out of college before I went to medical school. And at the end of the first year of medical, the first 2 years of medical school are nothing but classrooms and laboratories. And when you're a little bit older, you're sort of chomping at the bit to get your hands on some patients and to actually learn some skills so you could go home and say, hey, look at me, I can take a blood pressure, Like they make a joke about how when doctors graduate from medical school and they're walking the first day into the hospital as an intern carrying their black bags, there's a prayer that all of these young doctors say, please, dear God, don't let me drop this bag to the ground because I still haven't learned how to open it. And that's a fact. So being an older student, at the end of the first year, I was really looking to see some patients, and they put out a program. It was called the MECO program. It was an acronym for Medical Education Community Orientation. And I was fortunate that in Susquehanna County, where I've been practicing medicine for 45 years, there was a doctor up here who every year took a MECO student. And it was a great program for people who wanted to spend 6 weeks in the summer after their first or second year in medical school and go out with a rural physician. The whole purpose of the program was to try to recruit physicians into underserved areas of the state. So we came up to Susquehanna County and spent 6 weeks with a family doctor up here. And from the very onset, where I was going and scrubbing in on surgery, holding surgical instruments, being allowed to tie sutures, working in the emergency room, seeing patients on the floor, seeing patients in the doctor's office. From the very onset, I really threw myself into this, and there was a sharp contrast between life as a country doctor and life as a doctor in a big city. And although I wanted to get the kind of training that I would require to work in a big city, a very sophisticated level of training, after that summer, I felt it would be better served in an area where I actually could make a big difference. If I stayed in Philadelphia, which I had the opportunity to do, I was offered a third ownership in a Philadelphia mainline emergency room to be their director. I had financial certainty there, but I turned it down for financial uncertainty in the country because I felt I was one of a kind up here. I could make a significant difference. I could bring a level of health care to this community that they had never seen before. And so from that point on, after the first year of medical school, I had the ability to sort of customize my own medical training through the rest of medical school and my internal medicine residency, which I did at a very fine hospital, Abington Hospital outside of Philadelphia. I was able to go ahead and get to know physicians who were able to do procedures that I typically wouldn't have been taught how to do if I just followed a standard internal medicine track. But I learned how to do all kind of things, working extra hours in the emergency rooms, going ahead and bugging all these specialists, teaching me how to do different procedures and different techniques, so that by the time I came up here to the country and started my practice in 1981, I actually opened my office and constructed it as a small emergency room. And for 45 years, my office has been open to my patients 24/7, and I'm able to do basically anything here that a doctor can do in an emergency room. So if one of my patients gets sick at 3 a.m., I tell them, if you can come on over. I'll be glad to see you. I'll take care of your asthmatic attack or your laceration or whatever. And if you're too sick to do it, I'll go and hop in the truck and go and do a house call. I've found, because, we don't have the type of volume in the country that doctors have in the city. There are internists in the city that might be required to see 30, 40, 50 people a day. We don't have that kind of volume up here. And again, in a rural area like Susquehanna County, The dairy farms have long been sold off, and so families have moved out, and there's not a lot of opportunity here for kids that graduate from high school to come back here to do anything. So these kids have gone out to lives elsewhere. In fact, my own 3 children are all medical doctors. My oldest son is a ICU doctor at Yale University. My daughter is a neonatal intensive care specialist in Chester County, and she also has started her own corporation geared at helping physicians avoid burnout and get back into the flow of things. And my youngest son is a hospitalist in the Rocky Mountains. My youngest son is in a hospital that now has its first coronavirus case and not a single N95 mask.
What do you think about, Dad, when you hear that?
Well, my daughter called me this morning. She says, "How you doing today? You okay?" "I'm doing great." She says, "Guess what?" She says, "I found a couple N95 masks." One of my clients that she's helping with burnout, their father happens to own a construction company, and he has a whole box of them he's not using. And this patient kindly said to my daughter, "Could you use a couple extra masks?" So she says, "I'm going to mail you them." I said, "Look, don't send them to me. Send them to Matt." She says, "Oh, no, I got enough for Matt, too." I said, "Beautiful. This is great." So next week, I'll be able to use a mask rather than the surgical mask I used this week, all week. So I would ask anybody who can provide N95 masks to doctors that they know, make the phone call right now. And, while you're at it, why don't you just take a second to say, and thank you for dedicating your life to keeping us all well, because that's something that doctors don't ever hear enough of. So it's quite the thing to have 3 kids that have followed in your footsteps. My office is in my home, so my kids grew up with my patients. My patients became my family. We used to have summer outings on my property. Everybody would come, and everybody knew everybody. And I never once said to any of my 3 children, you got to really think about being a doctor. It's a great thing to do. I thought my 2 sons were going to be Major League Baseball players, and my daughter was a Division I softball player, and I thought as they were starting a new professional softball league for women, I thought she'd probably end up doing that and then wind up coaching or, teaching or something like that. But all 3 of them turned down, my 2 sons turned down professional tryouts, and my daughter did play Division I softball at Seton Hall, but they all wanted to go into medicine because they liked what I did. And they saw the difference. They saw people coming in before and after. So they felt that this is what they wanted to do with their lives.
There's no bigger reward, I would think, for a parent than that.
No. Back when I was promoting my books, when I first started publishing books, I would do like television interviews. I'd do a lot of phone hookups like we're doing today. And I was often asked, how are they going to remember you? As a doctor who wrote books or as an author who also practiced medicine? I said, I want to be remembered as the best father 3 kids ever had, and beyond that, I really don't care.
Dr. Bernard Leo Remakus, who has practiced internal medicine in rural Susquehanna County for 45 years. He is a native of Wilkes-Barre, and he is an author. He began as a poet in grade school at Marymount in Wilkes-Barre. He has since published 4 novels, Keystone, Cassidy's Solution, Mia and the Lame Duck, 3 works of nonfiction, 1 screenplay, and more than 200 scientific articles. To find him online, search for Bernard Remakus, Remakus, Remakus. Now, you were good enough to say to me at the start that you had something that you'd like to give to our listeners.
Absolutely. This weekend, I'd like to provide your readers with the opportunity to download free copies of all my books on Amazon.com. And on Amazon.com, these Kindle books, you do not require a Kindle reader. You can read them right off your computer or your iPad. All you have to do is Google, just put in Kindle app, APP, and there is a specific app that you could download, and it's free. They have it for every available system. All you do is download the app and then go to the Amazon.com. On the scroll menu at the top, scroll down to books. Just type in my name, Remakus, Remakus, and you'll see not only my 6 books, but my wife, Charlotte Remakus, has written a very beautiful ancestry book, which shows the migration of a number of families from the old country to the great new world. And it has photos in there of the old country, Ellis Island. It even has a segment about one of her uncles actually in the fight to capture Pancho Villa. So these 7 books are going to be available for a free download on Saturday and Sunday this weekend. Because of this time of very difficult financial hardship, I want to make my writing and my wife's writing available for free, and I hope you enjoy them.
It's wonderful to learn about the power of music in your life, the power of poetry and writing, and how they're not separate, are they?
Absolutely not, and don't forget to throw in the extraordinary power of the human condition. We're all in a mess right now. We're facing the plague of the 21st century, and we're all going to beat it, and we're going to beat it together. And all we have to do is help each other through this in any way that we can. A very small gesture, just like giving a mask to somebody, might save thousands of lives.
Dr. Bernard Remakus of Susquehanna County, Halstead.